So I was watching the X Zone TV channel last night when I was abducted by aliens, and they kept repeating to me over and over again, simultv.com, simultv.com.
What's simultv.com?
That's what I asked them. They had it written on the side of their UFO.
How do you spell that?
UFO.
No, I mean simultv.com.
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 Right. simultv.com.
Interesting that you were abducted by aliens in a simultv.com UFO last night.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Now that you mention it, I remember now last night I was awakened from a deep sleep. My great-grandmother was standing there. She said she'd come from the hereafter to tell me about simultv.com. She even spelled it out for me. simultv.com, sonny boy.
simultv.com.
simultv.com, sonny boy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Guys, you'll never guess what my psychic guru just told me.
simultv.com.
Exactly. Are you guys psychic too?
Of course.
We all know about simultv.com. simultv.com.
Welcome to another edition of Cal's Corner radio show here on the X Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Kal Korff and I'm your host, and the executive producer of the show is, of course, Rob McConnell. Now, folks, as regular listeners to the show will attest, we talk about everything from politics to the paranormal, and that's, of course, a wide variety of subjects, and today's going to be no different. So let's get the politics out of the way, international politics at least, and then we'll cut to the other half of the show, which is a lot more lighthearted but also important. Excuse me. Now, last week we talked about the death of the Saudi critic, as in Jamal Khashoggi. He's a journalist who, of course, has been writing for the Washington Post recently. Over the many years, he's written for many publications. The fear is that when he went into the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, Turkey, is that he never came out and was killed there. And we talked about in the last show the reports that apparently there was a recording made of his death, courtesy of apparently his Apple Watch that he wore. Anybody who has an Apple Watch or even an iPhone knows that they can activate a recording device very easily, or a recording feature. Apparently what has happened is not only was he killed, he was tortured, he was also cut into pieces, and he was beheaded. There was a bone saw that was brought in for the hit operation. In total, anywhere from 15 to 18 people were involved. It is a gruesome murder, cold-blooded hit, if you will, right out of something out of a movie, but only this time it was real. Now, what has been interesting is to observe the reaction of Saudi society. A lot of Saudis apparently believed naively that the government was telling them the truth when they said that we didn't know anything about it, and as far as we know, he picked up his papers at the consulate concerning his right to remarry. He was engaged, and he left. But it turns out that that wasn't true. According to the Saudi government now, the narrative has changed. There was a fist fight. It got out of control, and Khashoggi was killed in a chokehold. Now, people who know Khashoggi would know he's not a violent type. On the other hand, if someone was trying to kill him and he was being tortured, it is reasonable to assume that one might want to, or at least try to, defend their life if possible. There's also rumors that he was drugged as well. We don't know the full story. It is kind of comical in a morbid sense that the Saudis are investigating this when what is there to investigate? They know exactly what happened, or more importantly, what didn't happen. So what is there to investigate? This is like the foxes guarding the hens. What do you think is going to happen to some of the hens? They're going to be disappearing. So for people who are shocked that the Saudis would do this, that they're shocked that their crown prince would do this, all I can tell you is wake up, learn from history. There's nothing surprising in this. In fact, this probably would have still happened to Khashoggi if he had agreed to the original offer to return to Saudi Arabia. But fearing for his life, he decided not to do that, and he looked over his shoulder for the last several years because his life was in danger. Unfortunately, in Saudi society, even in the so-called liberalization that's going on today, which is both a oxymoron and it's also happening in a genuine sense, at least small baby steps by Saudi standards, there is no tolerance of criticism of leadership tolerated. And that is unfortunate because for any country to be a vibrant nation, you have to be able to criticize the leadership. If you want democracy, you have to be able to criticize the leadership. But the Saudi Arabia is not a democracy. It is a dictatorship. It is a monarchy. It has a king instead of what we call a dictator, even though the king is a dictator. His say or lack of is law. You have no rights except what he decides to give you, right or wrong. So when I read as a journalist, this was last year, that Saudi Arabia was reforming itself, I, as a human being, welcome that because I've been in the Middle East. I also am very aware of what a lot of the countries are like there and what they're not like. And one of my favorite countries in the Middle East is, of course, the United Arab Emirates. But the reason the United Arab Emirates is a very interesting country and very unique is because it's westernized. In other words, they kind of look the other way and don't come down with hardcore Islam in that country because they wouldn't be able to make the kind of money that they do if they ran their society that way. And they wouldn't be the financial capital of the Middle East other than what Israel has in the banking sector if they didn't liberalize themselves and essentially copy what are good parts of the West. When you go to the United Arab Emirates, you go to Abu Dhabi, you go to Dubai, pretty much anything that you could possibly want is there. The world's largest shopping mall is there. There's 1,200 stores. I've been there. Believe me, after 2 days of spending 2 full days there, you still can't see the whole thing if you want to really see it in detail. It's that big. They have pretty much everything. But what you will notice in that society is something very different. You will notice that very few Arabs are actually working. Instead, foreigners are doing the manual labor. You see them in the stores, in the restaurants, and instead you see Arabs sitting around, smoking the hookahs, having a good time, while everybody else does the manual work. And they're proud of that. They talk about it. They boast about it. There's nothing wrong with it in their mind, and I'm not judging it. That's the way that they run their society. But in the United Arab Emirates, you don't have real journalistic freedom. You don't have genuine free speech. There are not different political parties that engage each other, and you don't directly elect your leaders. Instead, you have the royal family, the emir, and in exchange for their patronage, you're expected to essentially toe the line, sit down and shut up and enjoy your life. And yes, they have a very high quality of standard of living there. And when I spoke to many foreigners in every visit that I've been there, and I've been there several times, you may remember that we relaunched this show here on the X Zone Broadcast Network from Abu Dhabi a little over a year ago, last August, as I recall. And they're happy there. They're much happier than they would be if they were back in their own countries. And they're earning better money and they're sending it back to their families. This is true of people I met from India who are working in Abu Dhabi, people who are from Sri Lanka, from Pakistan, from Syria, from other countries. Again, they're happy to be there and have that kind of living. But again, you don't have real freedom there. You don't. And let's not mince words and let's not call it what it is not. Let's not pretend that it's a democracy when it's not. Now, the reason I mention the United Arab Emirates is because their neighbor are the Saudis. And if there were any two countries that were very different, it's these two. What's interesting is that the Saudis are supposedly modernizing their society, and their crown prince, who's in, I believe he's 33 years old, this would be Mohammed bin Salman. He likes to go by the initials of MBS. That's what a lot of people do call him. He, of course, is trying to drag Saudi society into the modern era but with limits. The limits being, of course, that you can't question what he's doing. He has absolute authority. There is no democracy. There's no real freedom of press. The usual nonsense that has been part of Saudi society since day one. And I remember reading his comments when he was saying that the Saudi society has kind of lost its way and that it's time to liberalize it. Those are welcome words, welcome decisions. But when he goes on to say that he has to go back to the old ways, well, the old ways were absolutely not liberal in Saudi society. There's never been any such thing. And that is because at the core of Saudi society is the Wahhabi form of Islam. Now, like Christianity and other religions, Islam has its sects, if you will, its strains, its variants. The two major schools of Islam are Shia and Sunni. They've been killing each other for over 1,400 years, each of which claims that the other is a heretic, that they're kafir, that they're not following the true path of Islam, therefore they have a right to be killed. And within Shia and Sunni Islam are other branches of Islam. One of the most extreme and intolerant is called Wahhabism. Okay? It is not a coincidence that Osama bin Laden is and was a Wahhabi. Wahhabism is the official religion of Saudi Arabia. Thankfully, only 5% of Muslims worldwide follow Wahhabism. It is considered to be a redneck form of Islam. According to their doctrine, you can't be friends with anybody unless they're a fellow Wahhabi. You don't have to tell the truth to Christians. You're not supposed to honor their holidays. So if you live in America and you're a Muslim and you're a Wahhabi, you're not supposed to celebrate the 4th of July. Why? Because Islam doesn't recognize that. And those infidels, those Christians, do. Again, the 4th of July, in this case being America's independence. You can actually Google the twisted and hate-driven doctrine of Wahhabism, and we'll come back to discuss it a bit more after this commercial break.
Rob McConnell here, presenting an overview for Nicholas Paul Jennings, author of a fascinating book, Amen. It presents facts revealed by Egyptologists, facts that enable us to understand why Amen is the beginning of creation of God. It provides recommendations for religious leaders of the major religions to unify their beliefs and teach the Word of God. Love one another. Amen informs people how mankind conceived God. It was the Egyptians that developed the concepts of a soul, a hereafter, and Son of God. And finally, after the worship of many gods, they conceived the belief in one universal God, the maker of all there is. For more information, visit www.futureofgodamen.com. That's www.futureofgodamen.com. Whether you're a skeptic or a believer, join me, Rob McConnell, as together we'll investigate the world of the paranormal and the science of parapsychology here on the X-Zone Radio TV show on XZBN and the X-Zone TV channel on Simul TV. Since 1990, the X-Zone Radio TV show has been the place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. Together, we'll investigate UFOs, aliens, ghosts, Bigfoot, psychic phenomenon, lake monsters, conspiracy theories, government cover-ups, the truth embargo, alien abductions, ESP, haunted locations from around the world, and so much more. With over 28 years of broadcasting and more than 4,500 individual guests, the X-Zone is truly a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality, as evidenced by the credibility, integrity, and professionalism of the guests that we bring to our international audience. If you have seen a UFO, had a close encounter, seen a ghost, Bigfoot, lake monster, or a story that you would like to share or have investigated, contact me, Rob McConnell, by sending me your email to xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, or you can call toll-free 1-800-610-7035, extension 143, and on Skype, X-Zone Radio TV. For more information on the X-Zone Radio TV show with yours truly, Rob McConnell, visit www.xzoneradiotv.com or www.xzonetvchannel.com or simultv.com and xzbn.net. Until next we meet here in the X-Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, always remember, X-Zone Nation, keep your eyes to the sky and your heart in the light.
Welcome back to segment 2 here on Cal's Corner Radio Show here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Kal Korff and I'm your host, and the executive producer of the show, once again, is Rob McConnell. And we're talking about Wahhabism, and Wahhabism is another way of saying it. It is spelled W-A-H-H-A-B-I, Wahhabi. Wahhabism is W-A-H-H-A-B-I-S-M. Once again, it is a extreme form of intolerant Islam. About only 5% of all Muslims worldwide, thankfully, subscribe to Wahhabism. It is considered, again, to be kind of the extremist or redneck version of Islam, and their doctrine is purely hate-driven. They believe that if you are a Muslim and you convert out of your religion, let's say you want to become a Jew or you want to convert to Christianity, it is the duty of every Muslim to hunt you down and then kill you. The penalty for leaving Islam is death. That is how tolerant and understanding Wahhabism is. There was a publication that was produced years ago by the Eleanor Roosevelt Foundation. And it was rather interesting. It was actually a publication that exposed the hate-fueled doctrine and so-called religious teachings that the Saudis go ahead and try to brainwash people within their mosques around the world. What they did is secretly they grabbed some of this religious literature that was being given out for free. They translated it, of course, from the Arabic, and some of it was already in English for foreigners, and they put it in this report, and it exposed how the Saudis were actually teaching hatred. And what's interesting is if you Google Wahhabism, let's say you type in Google the search engine, key doctrine of Wahhabism, you'll get some rather skewed search results, which really don't tell you the full story. You'll see articles like the Saudis are waking up to the threat of Wahhabism, as if it's some new revelation that the Saudis have suddenly been hit over the head with, and they had no idea prior to this entire time that Wahhabism was a threat even to their own throne in existence. What a bunch of nonsense. In fact, it is pure bullschlacken, as we would say in Yiddish or in modern Hebrew, okay? BS, in other words. And let me tell you why. You have to look at the history of Saudi Arabia and how it was formed. First of all, there was no Saudi Arabia until fairly modern times. It is essentially a creation of the West in cooperation with the Al Saud family, who was a Bedouin tribe. Al Saud wanted power. He wanted to rule the area that is now known as Saudi Arabia, hence the name Saudi Arabia from the Al Saud family. So what he did is he hired a bunch of extremist, intolerant Islamic radicals who called themselves the Ikhwan, and they studied this form of Islam called Wahhabism. And what he basically said was this: you go out there and you convert everybody, or do whatever it is you're going to do, You attack them, you be my soldiers, and you guys can do whatever you want. I'll be your leader. I'll be the chief Wahhab, okay? And they agreed to that over time. If they didn't, he killed them anyway. And what happened is there was this Faustian bargain cut between the radical Ikhwan, the Wahhabis, and Ibrahim Saud, the original founder of Saudi Arabia. He needed fanatics to carry out his conquests, to show no mercy to his enemies. And what he did is he used them to further his political conquests. He captured a lot of land and territory, including the territories of Mecca and Medina. He drove the Hashemite family out of the area, and as compensation, the French and the British agreed to give the Hashemites, who used to control Mecca until they were kicked out by the Sauds and the Wahhabis, he gave them what's called Jordan, or what used to be called Transjordan, as a sop. That way they could claim that they were still the descendants of Muhammad, and he at least had some territory to rule over. And of course, the Hashemites to this day hate the Saudis, and vice versa. So that's the short version of what happened. So the Sauds, the Saudis, absolutely knew from day one what the Wahhabis were about, because they made a point to cut an alliance with them to use each other to further each other's ambitions. Now, what has happened over time is that on occasion, Wahhabi leaders, their title, whatever, their esteemed position, or whatever you want to call it, their status that the Saudi family gives them, it goes to their head, and what they do is they attack and bite the hand that feeds them. They turn against the royal family, and that's a no-no. It violates the understanding. So what happens is the Saudi royal family then clamps down on the Wahhabis, and there's a purge that takes place every once in a while. And you've seen that recently with MBS purging some of the senior elderly clerics who opposed his recent moves to allow women to finally drive and go ahead and hold jobs, and some of the other stuff that he's trying to put through reform-wise. But let's be honest here. These so-called reforms, they don't go far enough. And while I understand and am sensitive to the fact that when you have a culture that is backwards and represses, half the population, in this case women don't have any real serious rights in most of the Muslim world, let's be honest, let alone in Saudi Wahhabia. And that is the nickname for Saudi Arabia because it is Wahhabism. It's not enough to give them the right to drive or the right to vote. Women need to be treated like human beings, like equals, with the understanding that there are biological differences and all that other stuff. In the Arab world and in very patriarchal, tribal countries and cultures, these would include nations like India, which is a very tribal society, very patriarchal. These societies have to change and embrace more of Westernism and how women are viewed in the West if they're going to thrive and reach their full potential. Look at what's happening in America. Over half the population is now female. So guess what? Women are the majority of the population. In India, you have just the opposite problem, but for very different reasons. The reason that men outnumber women in India, in some places in the country as much as 70%, is because young female babies have been murdered in huge numbers there. It's called infanticide. It is a crime. And Indian society, in order to try to stop this sickness from continuing, actually had to pass laws that today in Indian society, if you're a young couple and you're going to have a child, it is illegal in India for the doctor to tell you ahead of time what the sex of that child is. It is a crime. They won't allow you to know. Why? Because they don't want the Stone Age types to say, I must have a son. If I don't have a son, the daughter must be killed. That is sick, killing your own child. But it happens in that culture to the point where there are entire areas of the country where there's a huge disproportionate number of men versus women, and India as a whole is suffering from that. And as a backlash and in an attempt to stop this insane murder of young female babies, what they've done is they've passed these laws so that you can't know what the sex is until it's born. There's other things they're trying to do as well, but India as a whole is a very sexist society, and women don't have the rights either in society or even legally that men do there. And it's even worse, of course, in Saudi Arabia. It's worse in a lot of Arab countries versus especially in the West. Now, having said this, I want to distinguish between treating women as equals and human beings, because they are, of course, versus what we would call modern twists on feminism. That's a very different issue. In my opinion, there's nothing wrong if a man wants to compliment a woman and say, you look beautiful today, or can I open the door for you, or whatever. I open the door for people all the time. I don't care whether they're men or women. I just open it for them because I think it's the right thing to do. Okay? So, very simple. What I've seen in the so-called feminism today is kind of an extreme left-wing twist to where it's hard to even say what these people really think they're trying to achieve. I remember one time seeing a woman get mad at a man who was trying to open the door for her. And she got mad and she said, do you think I can't open it myself? No, the man wasn't thinking that way. He was just trying to be helpful. That was it. But she took it the wrong way. That's, in my opinion, not the way that the feminism thing should work. I don't want to make this show about feminism because I'm not qualified to go there, but what we will do after the commercial break in a little bit is talk about how some of this, be right back.
So I was watching the X Zone TV channel last night when I was abducted by aliens, and they kept repeating to me over and over again, simultv.com, simultv.com.
What's simultv.com?
That's what I asked them. They had it written on the side of their UFO.
How do you spell that?
UFO.
No, I mean simultv.com.
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 Right. simultv.com.
Interesting that you were abducted by aliens in a simultv.com UFO last night.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Now that you mention it, I remember now last night I was awakened from a deep sleep. My great-grandmother was standing there. She said she'd come from the hereafter to tell me about simultv.com. She even spelled it out for me.
simultv.com, sonny boy.
simultv.com.
simultv.com, sonny boy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Guys, you'll never guess what my psychic guru just told me.
simultv.com.
Exactly. Are you guys psychic too?
Of course.
We all know about simultv.com. simultv.com.
Rob McConnell here, presenting an overview for Nicholas Paul Jennings, author of a fascinating book, Amen. It presents facts revealed by Egyptologists, facts that enable us to understand why Amen is the beginning of creation of God. It provides recommendations for religious leaders of the major religions to unify their beliefs and teach the Word of God. Love one another. Amen informs people how mankind conceived God. It was the Egyptians that developed the concepts of a soul, a hereafter, and Son of God. And finally, after the worship of many gods, they conceived the belief in one universal God, the maker of all there is. For more information, visit www.futureofgodamen.com. That's www.futureofgodamen.com.
Welcome back to the third segment here on Cal's Corner radio show here on the X Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Kal Korff and I'm your host, and the executive producer of the show is Rob McConnell. Now, folks, we were talking about feminism, and before that, the changes that are occurring in Saudi Arabia, but they don't go far enough. The terrible murder of Khashoggi just being the latest example of how Saudi Arabia has a long way to go before it can be considered to be a civilized country. Let's be honest with each other. And this type of thing that has occurred with Mr. Khashoggi has happened before. Saudi Arabia still does behead people when they commit the death penalty. In fact, a lot of women are killed in the Arab world, even when they're rape victims, because they get blamed for getting raped. That's how backwards it is there sometimes. So we talked about feminism. As somebody who was a child in the 60s and 70s, I can tell you that the type of feminism, as well as so-called liberalism back then, if you were liberal or progressive, was very different than what is going on today. I will tell you that, like people who like to throw the word around socialism and use it as if it means just free stuff. They don't understand what socialism really means. But yet you have millennials now who say, I'm a socialist. They are endorsing Marxism without understanding what Marxism or communism really was or is. They just like to repeat these terms. They like to say they're liberals, they're progressives, that they abhor or are against violence, while at the same time they're engaging in it. Look at the attacks from the left on innocent people just protesting, even if they're right-wingers who are not committing violence. Under U.S. law, they have a right to be there, even if you disagree with their message. And that's the point here. It used to be that the left used to put flowers into the barrels of rifles of soldiers, talking about peace. There are famous photos that are quite iconic from American history from the late 60s and the early 70s when the Vietnam War was being protested. Well, today, the left is pepper spraying people. They're using bike locks to hit people over the head. And then they get off light from judges who were sympathetic and don't consider that to be assault. But yet if a right-winger were to do the same thing to anybody, the book would be thrown at them. So there is a double standard there. And what happens is when you let this type of anarchy start to take over, where violence is suddenly deemed to be okay as long as it's used against somebody that you disagree with, and again, that is a principle that is completely wrong, you end up with a special language that doesn't match reality. Because when you have those kinds of ideas and precepts, you are no longer grounded in reality. Violence is never proper unless it is in self-defense. You don't sit there and try to overthrow your country or your government with violence when you can do it at the ballot box in a peaceful way, using a democratic process, using a constitutional system, a system that is part of a republic, which is what the United States is. And if you want change in leadership, that is exactly how you achieve it. You vote. And that's why that process exists. And that's why people died to set up the United States and why it became the country that it has become today, and why it achieved superpower status in a record amount of time in history, because it broke the mold. Again, look at America's history, the idea that you have freedom of speech, freedom of press. All people were created equal. Of course, there were misfires in the beginning. The founding fathers of America owned slaves, but when George Washington died, his slaves were freed. Abraham Lincoln, nearly 100 years later, freed the slaves. Yet it took another 100 years for John Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson to push through the civil rights movement, and we're still working on things today. But notice that most countries are out there copying America. They're not copying China. They're not busy copying Russia. They're not even trying to copy Canada, as wonderful as Canada is, especially in the last few years. They're especially not trying to copy socialist Canada. But yet you have a young generation that is running and saying, we're democratic socialists, and they don't understand what socialism is. Well, before we start going down our list of these 100 or so words that used to mean one thing and now they mean suddenly something else, let me remind all the young millennials out there what socialism really is, and give them my best advice to stop moving the goalposts and lying to people and making a fool out of yourself when you use the S word when it's obvious to anybody who understands basic English and history that you don't know what you're talking about. Now, socialism is when a government controls all the key points of basically a country's national resources, or choke points, if you will. This would include the telephone company, the power company, the internet. It would include public transportation. It would include the military, the armed forces. It would include the airlines. We've seen in the past governments that own everything. Look at communist China. Chinese enterprises, when they involve things like airlines, when they involve key national assets, are state-run enterprises. You cannot distinguish the Chinese government from, say, the situation in America where you've got the U.S. government, then you have a publicly held company like Apple or Google or Facebook. They're not owned by the U.S. government, okay? Instead, they're owned by shareholders. In China, China owns the key state industries because they're communist, they're socialist. So when people, millennials, point to Sweden as being a socialist government, they're not. They're private enterprise. They may have a general healthcare system. Yes, they do. Okay? The United States has a general healthcare system too for people on Social Security. They have Medicare, Medicaid. Social Security itself is a government program. But the United States is not a socialist country. Denmark is held up as another example. Well, no. In fact, if you bother checking with the government of Denmark, they will tell you they are not a socialist country because, again, private enterprise dictates their economy. The same is true for Sweden. Now, a good example of a wonderful socialist country is Venezuela, and it's in serious trouble because socialism historically has not worked. It doesn't work because it is not grounded in reality. Just like words must be grounded in reality, otherwise the whole point of language becomes meaningless. So let's now go over these popular terms that we're okay to use that now suddenly mean something else, and let's talk about how convoluted this has become. First word, very used widely nowadays, homosexual. Well, it used to be in previous generations, we would just say gay. You could even say queer. But now it's homosexuals, okay? All right, so if somebody says they're gay now, that has a whole different meaning. It no longer means you're happy. It no longer means I'm just in a good mood. I'm not happy and gay. It means I'm a homosexual. Homeless. Well, believe it or not, people hate the so-called progressives today. They don't want you to call people homeless. Believe it or not, they want you to use this phrase. I'm not making this up. I couldn't make this up. Outdoor urban dwellers. Okay? Now, think about that. You see a homeless person. They don't have enough to eat. They are on the street. They need a shower. Their hygiene is terrible. They have nowhere to go. They're homeless. And you're going to sit there and refer to them instead as an outdoor urban dweller? I would argue that if you're going to look at a human being that is suffering and you're not going to admit that he is homeless, he has no home, and instead you're going to say he's an outdoor urban dweller, shame on you. You're the one with the problem. You have no compassion, no feeling, no sympathy. Shame on you. Now look at the word insane. Again, there are people who say, don't call people insane. That's judgmental. Well, I'm sorry. Sometimes that's a scientific explanation for how some people are. There are some insane people out there. There have been insane people in history. Look at Hitler. Was he sane? Yeah, but he was also insane. Well, they don't want you saying insane. Instead, they want you to use the term reality challenged. I'm sorry, insane fits much better. Perverted. Well, they don't want you to call anybody perverted because, again, that's judgmental. Even though there are perverted people out there who do perverse, sick, twisted things, They don't want you to call them perverted. They want you to instead say that they're sexually dysfunctional. No. If they're perverted, they're perverted. Prostitute. We don't have prostitutes anymore. We have sex workers. We have sex care providers. Yeah, see, that's the latest twist on what used to be called a prostitute or a hooker, a sex care provider. I'm sorry. We need a word that basically describes what it is, sex for money. Sex care provider doesn't really say what it is, and it takes out an important context. If we have healthcare providers, sex care providers, how do you know what's going on? Again, I think the word prostitute works. We'll be back after this commercial break here, and we'll continue with this really stupid list, but it's a real list. I'm not making it up. We'll be back after this commercial break.
Whether you're a skeptic or a believer, join me, Rob McConnell, as together we'll investigate the world of the paranormal and the science of parapsychology here on the X-Zone Radio TV show on XZBN and the X-Zone TV channel on Simul TV. Since 1990, the X-Zone Radio TV show has been the place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. Together, we'll investigate UFOs, aliens, ghosts, Bigfoot, psychic phenomenon, lake monsters, conspiracy theories, government cover-ups, the truth embargo, alien abductions, ESP, haunted locations from around the world, and so much more. With over 28 years of broadcasting and more than 4,500 individual guests, the X-Zone is truly a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality, as evidenced by the credibility, integrity, and professionalism of the guests that we bring to our international audience. If you have seen a UFO, had a close encounter, seen a ghost, Bigfoot, lake monster, or a story that you would like to share or have investigated, contact me, Rob McConnell, by sending me your email to xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, or you can call toll-free 1-800-610-7035, extension 143, and on Skype, X-Zone Radio TV. For more information on the X-Zone Radio TV show with yours truly, Rob McConnell, visit www.xzoneradiotv.com or www.xzonetvchannel.com or simultv.com and xzbn.net. Until next we meet here in the X-Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, always remember, X-Zone Nation, keep your eyes to the sky and your heart in the light.
You have heard of the X-Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X-Zone, Sci-Fi, and Horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
Welcome back to the fourth and final segment here on Cal's Corner Radio Show here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Kal Korff, and I'm your host. Once again, the executive producer of the show is Rob McConnell. So, speaking of stupid words and stupid ways to say things, and this stupid list we're going over here, let's talk about the word stupid. You're not supposed to call things stupid anymore, okay? If somebody's stupid, they're not dumb, they're intellectually impaired, or they're unschooled. Now, this is what I find rather curious and hypocritical about these modern ways of saying something. You know, you can call somebody stupid and be judgmental, or you can say you did a stupid thing and actually be technically correct, like it may have been a stupid thing to stand in the middle of the freeway and then wonder why you got hit by a car, because it was a stupid thing to stand there in the middle of traffic. It's kind of common sense. But when somebody's intellectually impaired, but not stupid, because you don't want to judge them or hurt their feelings, aren't you judging them if you're saying that they're intellectually impaired? How do you know they're intellectually impaired? You're judging them by labeling that. And then unschooled, well, I'm sorry, I've been a boss over people who have PhDs, and I don't have a PhD. So I know plenty of people who do dumb things that are very educated and schooled. It's called being human. And I also know people who are unschooled that do pretty clever things. So I think the term unschooled is super judgmental. I think it's even worse than just calling somebody stupid. At least when you say they're stupid, it could refer to something they did that was stupid. But if you say they're unschooled, how do you know? And who's to say that they're unschooled versus you? So this whole thing of these are better words, better ways of saying it, so far doesn't seem to be the case. Now, what about the term dishonest? Instead of saying somebody's dishonest or they're not honest, they're ethically disoriented. Now, who the hell would think of a term like this, ethically disoriented? They're not ethically disoriented. If they're dishonest, they probably know they're dishonest. It's probably a deliberate choice versus accidental. So they're not ethically disoriented. They are absolutely ethically sure what they're doing, and what they're doing is ethically wrong. They're not disoriented. They're just deciding to be unethical. So they're dishonest. Call them what they are. Now, here's another one. Dustbin man, or trash can man, or trash man. Okay, this one's a classic. Sanitation engineer. Okay, that's kind of cute, but you know, it's, again, garbage man, garbage collector, fine. Now, here's one that is just plain stupid. I'm sorry. Now, I mean this in just, it makes no logical sense to me. If you take the word insult, okay, if someone feels insulted, it's okay to say now that they've been emotionally raped, okay? See, this is what the left does. They like to throw in inflammatory words. They like to throw around the R word, rape. They use it very carelessly, very recklessly. They use it to push your buttons, get people to react emotionally instead of intellectually. Another term they love to throw around is Nazi. If you listen to the left, Trump is a Nazi, even though he can't be a Nazi because his daughter is a Jew who's married to a Jew. And Trump is pro-Israel, therefore he can't be a Nazi. But see, the left likes to have it both ways. They like to have their cake and eat it too, or as I call it, their quiche and eat it too. They're just hypocrites. So if somebody is insulted, they're not emotionally raped, okay? Now, I'm very sensitive to the idea, it's kind of logical, that you can say terrible things and make somebody feel that way, but usually we don't use the term insult. If I'm insulting somebody, that doesn't mean they're being emotionally raped, and I believe that you shouldn't use the word rape unless it really is referring to that terrible act. Now, the term bisexual prostitute. Believe it or not, that means an equal opportunity prostitute. Now, this is rather curious because it's okay to have bisexual prostitutes, but you can't have prostitutes. They have to be sex care providers or sex workers. But if they're bisexual, they can be prostitutes. In fact, they can be equal opportunity prostitutes. Uh, Whoever thought this up, I just can't understand the logic there. It makes no sense to me. Poor. Poor people. We don't have poor people anymore, okay? People aren't broke. They're economically marginalized, okay? So I want you to remember that term because you'll hear it on CNN. You'll hear it from people like Rachel Maddow. You'll hear it from the la liberal left when they're talking about the economy and the homeless and the poor. They will talk about the economically marginalized. Now, I believe that when you say that somebody's poor or rich, people understand those terms. They're one syllable. They make sense. If you're rich, you got a lot of money, right? If you're poor, you don't. They're also emotional terms. People understand them. But if I suddenly say he's not poor, he's economically marginalized, again, how arrogant of me to come up with some fancy terminology when the fact is the individual is poor. And I should have empathy and sympathy for that individual. And if I can, try to help where possible. We should all try to help one another. If we spent our time focused only on ourselves, we wouldn't have a thing called society. We wouldn't have what's called family. Immigrant. Okay, well, immigrant. They're not immigrants, they're newcomers. Okay, well, I could see maybe somebody in the country calling somebody a newcomer. They used to call them strangers, sometimes even partners. But immigrants are newcomers now, okay? An illegal immigrant is a irregular immigrant or an undocumented worker. Now, we've talked about this before. Again, the left doesn't even understand basic English. If you're an immigrant, you have followed a legal process. You have stood in line, you filed your papers, you paid your fees, you've stayed within the law. There's no such thing as a illegal immigrant. You can have an illegal migrant, okay? You can have an illegal alien, but an immigrant follows a process, okay? Is an immigrant a newcomer? Depends. Depends on where they're going to, whether they've been there before. It just depends. So to call it a newcomer, I think, is ridiculous. I have no problem with the term illegal alien. If they're there illegally, they're aliens. If they're there illegally, they're automatically criminals. Call it what it is. Stop lying. Now, let's talk about something else. The phrase right-wing protest. Well, if you believe the mainstream media today, there's no such thing as a right-wing protest. It's just called a riot. Okay? And a left-wing riot is just a protest. See, it's okay if the left does this. They're protesting. When they riot, they're protesting. But when the right is protesting, they're rioting. See, you don't get it. You got it backwards, okay? Again, I'll repeat it one more time. If you're a right-winger or you disagree with the left and you're protesting, you're not protesting, you're rioting. You're the problem because you disagree with them. But if you're a left-winger, you don't riot, you protest. Even when you beat people with bicycle locks, you're protesting. You're not rioting. You're not committing violence. You're not hurting people. You're protesting. You're exercising your constitutional right to free speech, even though you're hurting people. That's what the left does. Okay? What about the term drunk? Nah, let's not call people drunk anymore, even when they are drunk. Believe it or not, there's a term that says chemically inconvenienced. Can you believe that? Chemically inconvenienced. Well, I don't know. Having been to 27 different countries, having drank different types of alcohol, I would say based on my own experience that I wasn't inconvenienced at all at times. I found it very convenient. I actually enjoyed a lot of the Czech spirits and things like that. They're very tasty. They make you feel great. So I wasn't chemically inconvenienced. I was chemically convenienced as far as I'm concerned. Did I get drunk and fall down and all that other stuff? No. Never lost myself that way. Just not wired that way. I know plenty of people who have. I've seen it. But in my case, I was chemically convenienced, and I was happy for it. Now here's another favorite of the left and liberal, and we'll end this show probably with this term: terrorist, freedom fighter, rebel, protester, insurgent. For the last time, a terrorist is not a freedom fighter. Freedom fighters are not terrorists. Terrorism is a deliberate, systematic targeting of innocent people for the purposes of political or social change. Freedom fighters don't target innocent people. They target government institutions or firms, the military, the police, and so on. The left likes you to think that anybody who takes up arms is a freedom fighter because terrorists don't like to say, hey, I'm a terrorist. Hamas doesn't like to call itself a terrorist group, even though it is. They like to say, we're the resistance. And that's the game they play. And the left likes to call them that. Hamas is a humanitarian or resistance organization. No, they're not. They're a terrorist group. They deliberately target innocent civilians for the purposes of political and social change. And that's what Hamas does. That's what a terrorist does. Freedom fighters, again, don't target innocent people. Rebels don't. Protesters don't. Insurgents don't. But terrorists do. All right, thanks for joining me this week on Cal's Corner radio show here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. We'll be back next week. Maybe we'll continue with a few more of these words, but I think you get the point. Words are important. We must say what we mean and mean what we say. Otherwise, there's no point in having a language. Again, thanks for joining me. We'll be back next week.
If you are looking for a safe, zero-calorie natural option to the harmful artificial sweeteners on the market today, Just Like Sugar is what you're looking for. Just Like Sugar is a wonderful natural alternative for those health-conscious people who choose a calorie-restricted diet with a great, pure, sweet flavor that tastes just like sugar. Just Like Sugar is a great natural option for people suffering from diabetes and may be useful in restricted diet programs where standard sugars are not allowed and does not cause a laxative effect of some other sweeteners. Just Like Sugar comprises a perfect blend of chicory root fiber, natural calcium, natural vitamin C, and Just Like Sugar's sweetness comes from the natural flavors from the peel of the orange. Just Like Sugar is a natural alternative to harmful artificial sweeteners and will change the way that you believe all natural sweetener products taste. Just Like Sugar is available at your local Whole Foods markets, Wild Oats markets, Henry's, Sun Harvest, and many other fine natural food stores in the U.S., Canada, and worldwide.
You have heard of the X-Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X-Zone, Sci-Fi, and Horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.